There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Matthew. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store.
And just like in all the other parables, the landowner represents God. And with this vineyard, all these religious leaders, they really should have figured the story out, because the vineyard that Jesus describes here is an exact description of God's vineyard that's written in the book of Isaiah in chapter 5, where it had a tower and it had a hedge around it, and where the stones were cleared away and the owner had built a wine press in it. And then he talks about this choice vine that he planted, and the choice vine would have been Israel. And that's what it's described in Psalm 80, that Israel was a choice vine that was planted that came out of Egypt. It's talking about the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. And even though they knew all these passages, it almost seems like they're just listening to Jesus like he's just telling them stories. And there may have been a lot of vineyards that actually matched this kind of description in Israel. And so Jesus, he goes on to tell them how this owner had leased his vineyard to the vine dressers. And so vine dressers are the kind of people that do this kind of work for a living. So these vine dressers are actually being paid to tend this landowner's vineyard. And this is a common story in Israel because every family owned land. And so this landowner, he sent his servant to get some of the fruit, which is reasonable. But the next part of this, it probably wasn't very common, where the vine dressers, they beat and they killed the landowner's servants, and they kept doing it, and he kept sending more, and they kept doing the same things to them. And these religious leaders are still not understanding that Jesus is talking about the prophets who God had sent to Israel in the past. And it's true that all the prophets of God, they were never received well by the Jewish leaderships. And the whole Old Testament is filled with this historical accounts, because that's exactly what happened to them. They were killed, they were stoned, they were persecuted. And this happened all the way up to John the Baptist. And then Jesus says that the landowner, he finally sends his son to them, and they don't know that Jesus is talking about himself, because they don't see Jesus as the Son of God who'd been sent to them. And then these vine dressers, they plot to kill Jesus to take his inheritance. And they do. They kill his son. They kill his son outside the vineyard, just like Jesus. Jesus was killed outside of the city of Jerusalem. And then Jesus, he asks him a question. He says, well, what's the landowner going to do to them? And they're so caught up in the story. And they actually say what they would do if they were the owner. Because all of these guys, they all own land. And it may be very well that they lease their own lands to others. And they say, destroy the wicked men and lease the vineyard to vine dressers who will render its fruit in season. And they don't know here that they're judging themselves, because they don't see themselves as wicked vine dressers. They don't see themselves as stealing from God. They don't see themselves as stealing Jesus' inheritance. Because the temple in Judaism, it doesn't belong to them. It never did. It's always belonged to God. That it's always been God's temple. And Israel has always been God's people. That these religious leaders, they were only hired to nourish it, to keep it, to tend its fruit. And they failed at it miserably. And so they're judging this exactly right. And he says that God will leave his vineyard to others. And he does. He leaves it to others, and that's the apostles, because that's who actually ends up tending his garden. And the nation that they say it's going to be replaced with, well, that's going to be not just a nation. It's going to be the Jewish and Gentile nations called the church. But these chief priests and these elders, they don't catch on. And they've just judged themselves. And then Jesus, he quotes another passage, and he quotes it out of that Psalm 118 again. And if you notice here that this is the same Psalm, Psalm 118, this is a messianic song. This is the one that's been sung about from the beginning, from the ride down the hillside on the donkey. It's the same song that the children were singing. In fact, this is the same song that's being sung by all Israel, because this is a psalm of ascent, which means that everybody sang this song as they went up to Jerusalem. Okay, so now he quotes from that same psalm, and he says, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it's wonderful in our eyes. Then he goes and he tells them that the kingdom will be taken away from them and given to others. And then he explains to him about this stone, about this cornerstone, where he's saying that everybody's going to have to make a choice. You're going to either have to come to him in humility and to fall upon the stone and be broken, which means that you need to come and surrender to him. But if you refuse, this stone's going to fall upon you, and it's going to fall upon you in your pride and in your resistance. And you're not only going to be crushed, you're going to be destroyed, and you're going to be ground into powder. And so now they finally get it, that Jesus is talking about himself, that he is that rejected stone, that he is rejected by them, and that their leadership is going to be taken away from them and given to others. And all this is said in front of that crowd. So instead of these people exposing Jesus, he exposed them. But even here, instead of repenting, it says that they wanted to take him right then, but they were too much cowards. And so I think the warning here for us and for those in leadership is to remember that the church belongs to God, that we're only tending his vineyard, we're only shepherding his sheep, that the people belong to him, and we're going to be accountable for the way that we handle things. But there's another part here I think that applies to us about the cornerstone, that thing that he said to the religious leaders here, that's for all of us, that we either come to Jesus in our humility and we surrender ourselves to be broken before him, and that we receive him, but that if we refuse to do that, he will come to us in judgment and we will be destroyed. And the truth is that nobody wants that to happen, especially Jesus. So this is the same day as the last time we met when we were studying chapter 21. So this is 2 days after the triumphal entry and the cleansing of the temple, and it's 1 day after the cursing of the fig tree. So this is Tuesday. This is Passion Week. This is the day when the disciples, they saw the withered fig tree. And this is only 3 days before Jesus is killed. And here at this time, Jesus has already given 2 other parables. And so he's already confronted the chief priests here about where his authority comes from with that parable of the 2 sons and how they had refused to receive God's message through John the Baptist. And then we also had just read that second parable about God's vineyard and how the ruling of Israel will be taken away from them because they killed the prophets and now they will kill the Son. And they realize that Jesus, that he is that stone which the builders rejected. And they finally understood, and it finally sunk in, that they were those builders, that all these parables that Jesus had been speaking, he had been speaking about them. And they had actually been tricked into pronouncing judgment on themselves. And so after being humiliated and wanting to take him right then, but they can't because of their fear of the crowd, they listen to Jesus' next parable about a king and about a wedding for his son. And so here in this parable, we're still talking about a father and a son. And just like in that last parable, the parable of the vineyard, where we saw that the son was killed, here in this parable, the father's son is alive again, as if maybe he had been resurrected. And where in this parable again, the father, he's God, and the son, again, is Jesus. And even though the nation of Israel, what they had done by killing the son in the last parable, God is still inviting them to come to his wedding feast because God still wants Israel to come. And that's because God loves Israel, and he always has. And so in this parable, Jesus is telling them about the future. This hasn't happened yet, and it will explain what will happen after Jesus' resurrection. And so now, in Jewish culture, a wedding would have been the biggest social event of the year. And for everyone who was invited, this would be very, very exciting. And for this family, for this father and this son, this would be the greatest event of their lifetime. And in the same way, it's the same for us. Our wedding day is the biggest day of our whole lives, and it should be. But this is not just a regular wedding. This is a royal wedding. This is like Prince Charles and Princess Diana when they got married. This is a fairy tale wedding. And if you can remember that wedding of Prince Charles and Di, there was so much excitement in the whole world that even the people here in the United States, they stayed up all night long just to watch that wedding with that time difference all the way over there in England. And so to be invited and to go to this king's son's wedding at the palace, it should have been a prized honor. And those invitations, they would have been sent out a long time before the wedding ever occurred. So this would have been something you would have written down in your social calendar. And there was a lot of plans because there would be a lot of preparations for such a big wedding banquet. And it would have been extensive. There would have been every detail gone over and over because it had to be absolutely perfect. And so when that day arrived, early in the morning, they would have had to start to prepare the food because they didn't have refrigeration back then. And so the oxen and the fatted calves, they would have to be slaughtered in the morning. And then they'd be roasted and prepared with all the other delicacies. And then all the tables, they would have to be set. You'd have like the table for the wines, and then you'd have to have the place for all the musicians. And you have to remember that a wedding banquet in Israel, it usually lasted for a week. It wasn't just a day. And this is a king's son's wedding. And so everybody, they knew the day of the wedding. They just wouldn't know the exact time that the feast would begin because nobody would know exactly when all the food would be prepared. And so when everything was ready, the second invitation would go out and they would announce, the wedding banquet is ready, come. And so the king, he sends out his servants to call the invited guests, but they don't come. And it's not that they can't come, it's that they're not willing to. And so the king, he sends out more servants to plead with them because this king wants these people to come because this king loves these people. And so his servants go out and they explain to him. He says, the oxen and the calves, they've been killed already. It's already started. The king really can't undo it. And it's not that he would, but this is not reasonable. And they made light of it. And they put this wedding lower than just their daily work, working on the farm, feeding the goats or whatever they had. They didn't have pigs. I'd say pigs, but the Jews don't have pigs. And so what they're doing is they're disrespecting their king, and they're disrespecting the king's son, the prince. And you know, very often a father will take so much disrespect. But when you disrespect a father's son for no reason, most fathers, they won't tolerate it. And so this king, he's furious. And he's furious at these guests. And these guests, they've brought this judgment on themselves.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.